We begin, as we always do, with the truth of a life stripped bare. Clara Doyle Whitmore was 36 years old, and by the autumn of 1887, she owned nothing but the clothes on her back, a small tin box of coins, and a single letter written in a dead man's hand. She had been cast out of her late husband's household by his brother, Nathaniel Whitmore, who claimed the sawmill and the house and the very bed she had slept in as his rightful due, and who told the county that a widow with no sons had no true claim to anything. What she carried away, after 11 years of marriage and labor, was $18 in silver, a shawl, and that letter, which named her the sole inheritor of a place called Larkspur Hollow, a town. Her great-uncle Elias had written that no map in the territory would show her, because every map that had ever shown it had been quietly, deliberately erased. The county clerk who processed the deed transfer charged her $22 in unpaid taxes to claim it, and told her, not unkindly, that she was a fool to pay good money for a place that did not exist. She paid it anyway, and what she would find buried beneath that vanished town's silent earth would not only change the whole shape of her life, it would answer a question that an entire region had been forbidden for 18 years even to ask. Settle in, and let us tell you the story of Clara Doyle Whitmore, if you are watching this from a place the world has decided to forget. Tell us where you're from in the comments. We would love to know that forgotten places are never truly empty. Clara had been raised in the high country of the Wyoming Territory, in a modest cabin at the edge of a logging camp, the daughter of a surveyor named Thomas Doyle, who believed, with the quiet stubbornness of a man who had spent his life correcting other men's errors, that a straight line honestly drawn was one of the few things in this world that could not be argued with. He taught her to read a section marker before she could read a hymnal, to sight a horizon through a transit, to understand the patient mathematics by which land was measured, divided, and recorded, and more importantly, the ways in which those records could be altered by men who wished to take what was not theirs. Her mother had died when Clara was 9, and so it was her father who raised her among chain pins and plat books, who let her sit at his drafting table on winter evenings while he inked township lines by lamplight, murmuring the names of creeks and ridge lines like a rosary. "A map is a promise, Clara girl," he used to say. "It tells the world a place is real. Take a place off the map, and men start to believe it never was." She did not understand then how much weight that lesson would one day carry. She had married young, 19, to a gentle, unambitious man named Samuel Whitmore, who ran a small sawmill with his brother Nathaniel in the town of Prescott Falls. And for a decade she had lived a quiet, useful life, keeping the mill's ledgers, for she had inherited her father's neat hand and his patience with numbers, tending a garden that fed half the mill hands' families in lean winters, and earning, without ever seeking it, a reputation as a woman who could be trusted with other people's troubles. Neighbors brought her their disputes over boundary fences and inheritance papers, the way other towns brought such things to a lawyer, because Clara Whitmore read a deed the way other women read scripture, slowly and for the truth in it. She had no children, a sorrow she carried privately, and perhaps because of this she poured her care outward, into the mill families, into the town, into her husband, who often said she had more sense in her little finger than he had in his whole body, and meant it as the highest compliment he knew how to give. It was this quiet, ordinary decency that made what came next so difficult for the town of Prescott Falls to watch. Samuel died of a fever in the spring of 1887, quickly and without warning, and within 3 weeks of his burial, Nathaniel Whitmore, who had always resented that his brother's wife kept books he could not follow and asked questions he could not answer, produced a set of papers before the circuit judge showing that the mill and the house had been held in his name alone since before Samuel's death, a filing Clara had never seen and did not believe was honest, though she had no way, in that moment, of proving otherwise. The judge, a tired man near the end of his circuit and inclined to side with whichever party held the paper, ruled for Nathaniel. Clara was given 8 days to remove herself from the house. Neighbors who had once brought her their troubles now looked away on the street, not out of cruelty, but out of the particular helplessness good people feel when they watch an injustice they cannot undo. She left Prescott Falls with a single trunk $18, and the bitter education that a life built honestly could be dismantled by a man willing to lie on paper, the very kind of lie her father had warned her about, now turned against her by her own kin. She was staying in a boarding house in the rail town of Kettleman, taking and mending to survive, when the letter found her, forwarded 3 times. Its edges soft with handling, from a great uncle she had met perhaps twice in her childhood. A man named Elias Doyle, who had been, her father once said, the wandering half of the family, a prospector and sometimes surveyor who had vanished into the mountains decades before and was assumed, by most of the family, to be long dead. He was not dead when he wrote it, only dying in a charity ward in Cheyenne. And the letter, which the attending clergyman had mailed on his behalf after his passing, was short, strange, and utterly without explanation. It said that he left to her, as his only living kin with the surveyor's eye, the whole of a place called Larkspur Hollow, in the high country north of the Wind River country, together with all rights, buildings, and ground appurtenant to it. It said that she should go to the county recorder's office in the town of Gilchrist to claim it, and that she should bring a shovel. And it said one more thing, in a hand grown shaky near the end. Clara girl, for that is what your father always called you. And so shall I. The world was told this burned to the ground, and its people scattered. That is a lie 18 years old, and it is time someone honest was the one to find it out. She went, because she had $18 and nowhere else in the world that wanted her, and because her father's blood in her could not leave a lie like that unexamined. The clerk at Gilchrist, a narrow, ink-stained man named Pernell, laughed outright when she asked after Larkspur Hollow, then stopped laughing when he found, buried at the bottom of a drawer of unclaimed parcels, an original township filing dated 1869. The town had existed, on paper, once, struck through in red with a note reading simply, abandoned, struck from State Atlas. 1869. He told her that in 18 years no atlas printed in the territory had shown any such place. That older residents spoke of it only in the vaguest terms, as a camp that had washed out or burned, and that he could think of no earthly reason a body would want to claim 400 acres of nothing at the top of a dead-end canyon. He charged her $22 in back taxes owed against the parcel to formalize the transfer into her name, which was very nearly every cent she had, and told her, with the weary kindness of a man who had seen every kind of foolishness cross his counter, that she was throwing good money into a hole in the ground. Clara paid it, took her deed, and did not tell him that her father had raised her to believe a place struck from. Every map was not a place with nothing left to find. It was a place. Someone had gone to great trouble to make sure no one looked at twice. She reached Larkspur Hollow on the 4th day of a hard, cold ride north from Gilchrist, following a game trail her great-uncle's letter had described with a precision that told her he, too, had once been a surveyor of some skill. And when she came at last through the narrow throat of the canyon and saw what lay beyond it, she reined in her borrowed horse and simply sat, silent, for a long while. It was not ash and rubble, as the county story had led her to expect. It was a town, a real, whole if profoundly weathered town. Perhaps 20 structures still standing along a single wide street gone to grass and wild lupine. A church with its steeple leaning but intact. A mercantile with its false front sun-bleached to the color of bone. A scattering of cabins with their roofs mostly sound in the dry mountain air. Nothing here had burned. Someone had simply walked away from it all at once, and the wilderness had spent 18 patient years reclaiming what remained. She camped that first night in the mercantile, wrapped in her shawl beside a fire built from a broken shelf, and understood, with the particular clarity of the very tired, that the story the county told about this place and the place itself did not match. And that gap was exactly where her great-uncle had meant her to look. Asterisk. She reached Larkspur Hollow on the fourth day of a hard, cold ride north from Gilchrist. Following a game trail her great-uncle's letter had described with a precision that told her he, too, had once been a surveyor of some skill. And when she came at last through the narrow throat of the canyon and saw what lay beyond it, she reined in her borrowed horse and simply sat, silent, for a long while. It was not ash and rubble, as the county's story had led her to expect. It was a town, a real, whole if profoundly weathered town. Perhaps 20 structures still standing along a single wide street, gone to grass and wild lupine. A church with its steeple leaning but intact. A mercantile with its false front sun-bleached to the color of bone. A scattering of cabins with their roofs mostly sound in the dry mountain air. Nothing here had burned. Someone had simply walked away from it, all at once, and the wilderness had spent 18 patient years reclaiming what remained. She camped that first night in the mercantile, wrapped in her shawl beside a fire built from a broken shelf, and understood, with the particular clarity of the very tired, that the story the county told about this place and the place itself did not match. And that gap was exactly where her great-uncle had meant her to look. The first clue came on her second morning, when she went looking for water and found, instead, the little cemetery at the edge of town, perhaps 30 graves, most with simple wooden markers gone gray and illegible, but one, near the fence line, cut from stone. Elias Doyle's partner, Martin Okafor, died this place, 1869. A honest man who would not sign. Clara stood over that stone a long time, turning the phrase over, honest man who would not sign, before she understood it was not poor grammar but a message, left by someone who could not say more on a public stone, but wanted the truth to outlast him in whatever fragment it could survive as. She returned to the mercantile and searched it more carefully in the daylight, and beneath a loose floorboard behind the old counter, the kind of hiding place her father had taught her to check first. Because a floor's honesty is easiest to disguise, she found a small tin box, rusted nearly shut, containing a single folded survey map of the hollow and its surrounding hills, marked in her great-uncle's own hand with strange notations along the ridge above town. A cross, a series of numbers, and the words, "The vein runs true, they know it now." God help us. She did not yet know what the vein was or who they were, but she understood enough of her father's surveying language to see that Elias Doyle had once mapped mineral deposits beneath these hills with the same careful precision he'd used to teach her a boundary line, and that whatever he'd found here had mattered enough to someone that an entire town had been struck from the record of the world, rather than let stand as a witness to it. The deepening of the mystery came slowly, over the better part of 2 weeks, as Clara, with nowhere else to be and nothing left to lose, made Larkspur Hollow's dead speak to her the only way the dead ever can, through the things they left behind. She cleared the church first, and in the small room behind its pulpit found a trunk of parish records that told her the town had numbered nearly 200 souls at its height, miners and their families, and a handful of freedmen who had come west after the war to work claims where a man's labor, if not always his dignity, was judged by what he could pull from the ground rather than the color of his hands, among them Martin Okafor, whose gravestone she had already found, and who the records showed had been, in the spring of 1869, the duly elected recorder of mining claims for the entire district, a position of real authority that a black man rarely held in that country and time, and one that made him, she began to suspect, dangerous to somebody. The mercantile's back room yielded a ledger of claim filings in Okafor's careful hand, showing that in April of 1869, a rich silver vein had been discovered and properly filed, not by a mining company, but jointly by the town's own miners' cooperative, meaning the wealth of it belonged, by law, to the ordinary families of Larkspur Hollow, and not to any distant investor. It was in the old assay office, its scale still standing dusty on its counter, that she found the second half of the story, a stack of letters, never sent, addressed to territorial officials in Cheyenne, in which Okafor and Elias Doyle together laid out, with the same patient precision her father had prized, evidence that a mining syndicate out of Denver, the Callaway mining concern, headed by a man named Augustus Callaway, had tried 3 times to force the cooperative to sell its claim below value, and 3 times been refused because the town's charter required unanimous consent of its filed claimants. And Martin Okafor, as recorder, would not falsify the record to remove the objecting families, no matter what he was offered. The last letter, dated the very week before the graveyard's dates began, said plainly, "Callaway's men have threatened to see this town wiped from the state's own atlas rather than let a nigger recorder and a lot of stubborn Irish and Cornish diggers keep a silver vein worth a fortune from men who believe they are owed it by birth. I do not believe they can do such a thing. I begin to fear I am wrong." Clara sat with that letter until the light failed, understanding now what her great-uncle had meant by the truth being 18 years old, and understanding, too, why he had left this place to her and not simply burned what he knew. Some things, once known, cannot honestly be set back down. She was not permitted to sit with it quietly for very much longer, because word travels even to places that do not appear on any map. And within the month a rider came up the canyon trail, a broad, comfortable man in a fine gray coat who introduced himself as Josiah Callaway, grandson of Augustus, and current president of the Callaway mining concern, which still, he informed her with a pleasant smile that did not reach his eyes, held extensive and profitable claims in the hills directly above Larkspur Hollow. He had heard, he said, that the old ghost town had passed to new ownership, and he had come himself, as a courtesy, to make the new owner a generous offer for the worthless parcel, $300. Cash, more money than Clara had seen in one place in her whole life. For 400 acres the county itself had called good for nothing. She thanked him for his courtesy and told him she would need time to consider it, and watched something cold pass behind his agreeable face before he tipped his hat and rode back down the canyon. And she understood, with the same clean certainty with which she had once read a false deed, that a man does not offer $300 for nothing unless nothing is exactly what he is afraid it is not. He returned within the week with a different offer entirely. He brought with him the county assessor and a lawyer from Gilchrist. And this time the talk was not of purchase but of irregularities in her claim, a suggestion that the original 1869 township filing had lapsed decades before her great-uncle ever held it, that her deed was worthless, that she was in fact trespassing on concerned land and would be wise to leave before the matter was taken to a judge who, Callaway noted with a small, unhurried smile, knows this district rather well. Clara, who had once watched a circuit judge take a lying man's paper over an honest woman's truth, felt the old helplessness rise in her chest, and then felt, just as quickly, her father's voice underneath it. Steady as a plumb line, a map as a promise. She told Callaway and his lawyer, with a calm she did not entirely feel, that she would be glad to have the matter settled before a judge, provided the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne was permitted to review the original 1869 cooperative, filing alongside whatever paper the concern wished to present, because she happened to have a copy of that filing in the hand of the district's own sworn recorder in her possession. She did not say more than that. She did not need to. She watched the lawyer's expression change, and watched Calloway's smile hold a half-second too long before it dropped away entirely. He did not threaten her outright. Men like Josiah Calloway rarely needed to speak a threat aloud for it to be understood. But in the days that followed, a fire she had banked carefully in the mercantile stove was found smoldering dangerously near an unattended pile of dry ledger paper she was certain she had left elsewhere. A stranger was seen watching the canyon mouth from the ridge above, and word reached her, through a sympathetic teamster who hauled supply up from Gilchrist, that the concern was quietly buying up the silence of any old-timer in the region who might remember Larkspur Hollow as anything other than a burned-out failure. Clara understood then that she was not merely defending a worthless deed. She was the last person standing between a truth 18 years buried and a man determined to see it stay that way. And that the town's dead, Martin Okafor most of all, were depending on her to finish what an honest recorder had died refusing to falsify. She did not go to the judge Calloway had all but named as his own. Instead, she did what her father had raised her to do with a genuine grievance against a powerful liar. She went to the record itself, and to the one authority a mining concern in that territory could not quietly buy off, the Federal Land Office, where mineral claims of real value were, by law, subject to review whenever fraud in the original filing was credibly alleged. She rode 3 days to Cheyenne with Okafor's ledger, the unsent letters, her great-uncle's annotated survey, and the struck 1869 township filing Pernell had unearthed from his drawer. And she requested, as the deeded owner of record, a formal federal review of the Larkspur Hollow cooperative claim under the mining law of 1866, on the grounds that the original filing had never lawfully lapsed but had instead been fraudulently struck from the territorial atlas to conceal an unresolved and unpaid claim belonging to the town's own miners' cooperative. It took the land office the better part of 6 weeks to send an examiner into the field, a careful, unhurried man named Franklin Reyes, who read Okafor's ledger with the same slow respect Clara herself gave to an honest document, and who found, once he had walked the vein above Larkspur Hollow and matched it against Elias Doyle's old survey marks, that the concern's own working claims for 18 years had been quietly, illegally extended onto ground that had never stopped belonging, on paper and in law, to the cooperative of Larkspur Hollow's original families. The reckoning, when it came, was not the kind that makes for a dramatic tale of gunfire and vengeance. And Clara was glad of it, for that had never been what she wanted. The land office's ruling voided the concern's extended claims above the hollow and restored the original cooperative filing, meaning that 18 years of silver drawn from that ground had been drawn in the law's own eyes, from ground the concern did not own, a finding that opened Josiah Calloway to a civil accounting his own lawyers would spend years untangling, and that saw him quietly step back from the concern's presidency within the year, rather than let a federal audit reach any further into his grandfather's old dealings. Clara took no part of that reckoning as personal spoils. What mattered far more to her was the second half of the ruling, which recognized her as the deed holder acting on behalf of the original cooperative's heirs, as trustee of the restored claim, and she spent the following spring doing the one thing she had wanted to do since she first stood in that leaning, silent street. She found the scattered descendants of Larkspur Hollow's old families, the Okafors and the Doyles and the Cornish diggers and the Irish teamsters, wherever the last 18 years had blown them. And she brought them, one deed and one letter at a time, their rightful share of a fortune their fathers had died rather than sign away. The town itself she had restored to the state's atlas under its old name, its charter renewed, its cemetery fenced, and its stones reset. Martin Okafor's marker cleaned and re-lettered so that its final line could be read plainly again by anyone who cared to stop and read it. And so we return, as we always must, to where we began, to a woman of 36 who had $18, a shawl, and a letter from a dead man, standing at a county counter being told she was a fool to pay good money for a place that did not exist. Clara Doyle Whitmore had lost a husband, a home, and a mill to a lie written on paper by a man who believed a woman with no sons had no claim to anything. She had answered that lie, in the end, not with anger, but with the same patient, unglamorous honesty her father had once taught her at a drafting table by lamplight, reading a document until it told her the truth, and trusting that truth, however inconvenient to powerful men, more than she trusted their smiles. What she found buried at Larkspur Hollow was never simply silver. It was the proof of an honest man's refusal to sign a lie, kept safe for 18 years by a wandering great-uncle who could not undo the wrong done, but could make certain someday someone would. Clara did not restore that town to make herself rich. She restored it because a place struck from every map is not a place with nothing left in it. It is a place someone worked very hard to make the world stop looking at. And she had been raised without ever quite knowing why. To be exactly the kind of person who looks anyway. Thank you for spending this time with Clara's story. And with Larkspur Hollow. And with all the quiet, overlooked corners of the past that are still. If someone is willing to dig, waiting to be set right. If this story moved you, we would be grateful if you shared it with someone who needs a reminder that value is not always where the world says to look for it. And we would love it if you left this video a like so more people can find their way here. Before you go, we would like to ask you something we ask ourselves often. What is a time you found real worth in something, or someone that everyone else had already written off? Tell us in the comments below. We read everyone, and we are always glad of the company. Until next time, stay close.